Good morning, folks. So I want to just give you a few notes and some things to pay attention to as you go through Africa 101, the wake up call. This is the text that we are on, and this is by Arikana Chirambori Kwao. And you have already turned in your summaries of the text, but I just want to have you take note of a few things. So, Dr. Arikana Chirimbori Kwao is a medical doctor, an activist, and the former African Union ambassador to the United States. She was born in Zimbabwe and she migrated to the United States after many years of living in Zimbabwe. She is known for her efforts to improve healthcare systems, particularly in African countries, and promoting women's rights globally. Dr. Chimbori Kwao has been involved in various programs and projects of the African Union, including serving as chair of the African Union African Diaspora Health Initiative. And she's also a public speaker, an educator, a diplomat, a founder of medical clinics, an entrepreneur. The list goes on. So she was born in Zimbabwe, but when she comes to the United States, she attends Fisk University and Meharry Medical College, where she earned her degrees in chemistry, organic chemistry, and then her doctorate in medicine. She completed 3 years of general surgery at University of New York, or SUNY, in Brooklyn, and a residency in family medicine at Meharry Medical College, and that's in Nashville, Tennessee. Before her appointment as the African Union ambassador, she was a family medicine doctor in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and she practiced medicine for almost 3 decades. She's known for her advocacy in terms of African unity, economic liberation, and empowerment of people of African descent worldwide. Oftentimes, you will hear her refer to the diaspora, and she is often talking about not only the diaspora of people who were born on the continent and have moved to other parts of the world, but also those descendants of people who were part of the forced migration from Africa. She's a vocal proponent of Pan-Africanism and has spoken out against the historical and ongoing exploitation of Africa and its resources by external powers. And you'll see that in this text that has been assigned. Her work has focused on promoting investment in Africa's development and advocating for free trade, fostering economic opportunities for the African diaspora, and for healthcare and women's rights. And so those are many of the things that are part of our platform. So let's take a look at this text. So in this book, she is addressing the historical and ongoing challenges faced by the continent. You were tasked with reading particularly the chapters in regards to the scramble for Africa and the ongoing impact of that scramble for Africa. She uses personal stories, historical references, and her experiences as a diplomat to talk about the abuse of Africa by Western countries. And the book calls on Africans and people of African descent worldwide to rise up in defense of the continent and to challenge readers to take action. And this is why we see the title, a wake up call, that the book is intended to be a call for action. In the main message, she is not only talking about that exploitation of Africa, but the book portrays Africa as the hunted and its exploiters, slavers, and colonizers, as well as neo-colonizers as the hunters. And it serves to dismantle stereotypes and to end racism, outlining plans for initiatives and a timetable for Africans on the continent and in the diaspora, along with Friends of Africa, to work towards a better future. So in terms of the selection of this book, it is to kind of hear from somebody who was born in Africa, uh, born and raised in Africa, and has a unique perspective in regards to what that means to be from a place that is not only was not only colonized, but is still feeling the impacts of that colonization. And what I want you to focus on is, we've been talking about social structures before colonization. And certainly in this text, she talks about on page 64, prior to the Berlin, and I'm quoting, prior to the Berlin Conference, Africa was divided into powerful kingdoms and with well-established economic, religious, and educational systems. The chopping up of Africa in Berlin was done with total disregard for the tribal and cultural identity of the Africans. The divisions were so arbitrary that some accounts have it that husband and wife went to bed in Southern Africa, and by the break of day, the husband found himself in a country called Zambia, and the wife in a country called Malawi. If we take a look maybe 2 pages over, page 66, again, she's further talking about the social structure, but now she is talking about the social structure moving from those empires and those kingdoms into a kind of European social structure that is colonization and based on the rule of divide and conquer. So on page 66, it says, the colonizers considered harmonious relationships between kingdoms anywhere on the continent totally unacceptable. The more the kingdoms got along, the more countries they carved out of them. To further confuse the identities of people, these newly carved out countries were assigned to colonizers who spoke different languages. This was by design to see to it that people who were once one, given a generation or two, would no longer realize they were ever related. In a generation or two, they would be speaking different languages and pledging allegiance to different colonizers. The kingdoms that did not get along were left intact to sustain their hostility toward each other and support the colonial masters' divisive agenda. Through propaganda and manipulative tactics, they made the Africans believed that everything African was bad and everything European was better and more desirable. Now, I also want to um, turn your attention to, that was page 76. On page 78, she's further talking about not just divide and conquer as a tactic, but she says the colonizers' second method of conquest and a major strategy they used in colonizing the Africans was to sow the seed that programmed our people to believe that anything and everything African was bad and undesirable, while everything European was better and more desirable. This is another legacy of colonization. Sadly, too many of us continue to suffer from this affliction. This means, excuse me, this remains one of Africa's biggest challenges, resulting in the shackles of the mind. While we may have lost the shackles of the hands and feet, the shackles of the mind remain as tight as they can be. This is singularly the biggest hindrance to true liberation of Black people around the globe. Most of us are not even aware that we are suffering from this disease, yet we are in the intensive care of it. As Black people around the globe, we are wounded people and we need healing. So these are Chiambori Quao's words in terms of these ongoing effects. And we could think about how a system called colonization could come to an end, but some of these, excuse me, strategies that have been used to devalue one's own culture and cultural positioning, and then to elevate another cultural position. Those are things that are much more difficult to um, kind of, you can't just flip a switch and have those things either revert back to where they were or even to have a new vision. Those things take time. And so this is the moment, excuse me, this is the moment in which we are encountering this book, and even in 2024, the state that many of the countries on the continent of Africa are in, trying to um, kind of dismantle those stereotypes and even that cultural devaluing, and to end a lot of the not just racism but internalized racism. On 70, a little further on 78 over to 79, she writes, the Berlin Conference was nothing but an unholy scheme that can be likened to armed robbers forcefully gaining entry into a house and dividing its valuables up amongst themselves, while the owners of the house, who have been tied up with thick ropes, look on helplessly as the robbers take over their home. Once settled, the robbers then proceed to make the homeowners their servants. And so there's another passage on 87 that I want you to take a look at. And it is the paragraph that begins, is talking about the World Wars and the British veterans. And so I want you to take a look at that, or at least listen to the passage. She writes, British veterans of the First or Second World Wars and any adventurous Britons were guaranteed 2,000 hectares, and I may be butchering that. So I'm just going to read the translation, or the conversion is 4,942 acres of land in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, plus any loot from the local people. When a British man arrived in Rhodesia for the first time, He was directed to regions 1 or 2 to map out his land. The British man would get on a horse and ride in one direction until he or his horse became too tired to proceed. A wooden peg was placed at this point. The following day, he repeated the same journey in a different direction in a rectangular fashion. This was repeated for a total of 4 days. After that, everything within the 4-point enclosure belonged to the British settler, with the exception of the people. The settler would storm into the village, usually in the early hours of the morning, and begin torching the huts. The inhabitants who owned this land were forced to leave their village. Um, who who owned this land were forced to leave as their village was being burnt down. The settler would order them in this direction, go past that river, in this direction, go past that mountain. Your land is now mine. The settler did not care where they went as long as they left the now illegally acquired land. Helpless and now dispossessed of their land and the land that was bequeathed to them by their ancestors, the villagers who were scared to death hurriedly left with only what they could carry, backed by a ridiculous British loot law. And the British stayed behind and looted the villagers' chickens and goats and donkeys and cows and whatever was left behind. And she says that this loot law encouraged the settlers to loot from the local people without any consequences whatsoever. I think that's an important passage because there is still this tension around whether land is going to be restored back to the indigenous people, or do these claims through things like the British loot law, will they continue to stand? And this is some of the very much ongoing tension, particularly for people who are primarily agricultural people. Land is very important. And some of the stories of these huge acres of land that are owned by some of these settlers and their descendants, it is like the use of the land is maybe a small part of it is for the raising of livestock, but there are so many more families that would be able to use that same amount of land, because you have to think about that land that now belongs to one family in the years prior to colonization actually was the home site of an entire village, right? So these are these ongoing tensions and some things that have not really been resolved um, in in a way that is satisfactory to a lot of the indigenous people that live there. So I want to show a video. I'm going to include the link so that if for some reason we're not able to finish watching it, um, that you can take a look at it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go to the questions and then have you take a look at this video, and then that's where we will start our conversation on Thursday. So a couple of things I want you to think about. I want you to think about resistance and independence, shifting from these social structures that are giving shape to the politics, the economics, even the educational and the religious systems. The question is, how did the people that you are studying, how did they resist underneath European colonization? Under what conditions did they gain independence? and describe the post-colonial social structure, right? So we've given some description of what the pre-colonial uh, structure looked like, those kingdoms and empires. We've talked a little bit about what the colonial social structure looked like. So what does the post-colonial social structure look like in the place that you are studying? And what, if anything, is the current impact of colonization? So Ambassador Chiambore Kwao, she is speaking from a broad sense, but she's also speaking from her experiences in Zimbabwe in particular. Uh, she is actually married to someone who is from Ghana, so she has had some direct experience also in Ghana. But the question is, what are you finding? And what are you finding in the place that you are studying this semester? So we're going to keep coming back to that as you gain information from these texts. And then what are you finding, or what have you found with the sources that you are pulling together? And so with that, I'm going to um, actually I'm going to go to, let's see if I can go to YouTube, and I want to drop this particular link in the chat. And let's see. All right, I'm going to drop this link in the chat. And then also I'm going to put it on our Moodle page so that you can take a look and hear from her not only what she is articulating in the book, but then also how she is applying her analysis to some very recent events that are occurring on the African continent. So again, this is the video that is this one-on-one with Dr. Arikana. And I'm going to post it. So we'll kind of get a little, I just wanted to give you a little introduction in here, but I'll post this actual video on our Moodle page. All right, thank you. And I will see you face to face in the basement of the chapel on Thursday morning. Right. Bye.